Have you ever worried about dying from the common cold? It's a pretty terrifying concept, and New Zealanders 100 years ago definitely were worried about it. But when you think about it, our efforts against bugs have come a long way in this 100 years, but we've hit a wall. You see, bacteria are learning to beat modern medicine, and it's getting very scary. We're currently winning the battles, but soon enough, bacteria will win the war. It's estimated by the World Health Organization that by 2050, the current 700,000 yearly death toll due to superbugs will skyrocket to 10 million. New Zealand will not be spared, and we need a solution, and we're going to need one pretty soon. This topic is close to me because I row for Mount Albert Grammar School, and if any of you know a rower, you'll understand that the sport can be the equivalent of taking your hand, placing it on a cheese grater, and rubbing as hard as you can. Indeed, I'm talking about blisters. Blisters are basically pockets of fluid in between the upper layers of your skin, and they are so easy to get, and blister bacterial infections are not unheard of. Leptospirosis, sepsis, cellulitis, MRSA superbugs are all examples of worst-case scenarios, and they're getting scarier, because our number one weapon against them is antibiotics. You see, antibiotics are a wonder drug that we discovered back in 1926. Before this, the smallest of cuts could lead to our death, and bacteria are learning to beat our antibiotics. You might think I say number one as in the best choice in medicine, but right now, antibiotics are our only choice in medicine against bacteria. AMR, antimicrobial resistance. This is the Bacteria Revolution against antibiotics. For you to understand how this works, I need to explain what antibiotics are. In their simplest form, they are basically just a tool that we use to fight bacteria cells. Without them, these diseases are almost impossible to cure. You see, how do bacteria beat antibiotics? Let me introduce you to gram-negative bacteria. What characterizes gram-negative bacteria is their full body armor shell. This shell is impermeable. It is so hard for antibiotics to get into, the stronger they are. Where's the problem? Well, say you have an infection and antibiotics kill 99% of the bacteria. The 1% left over is the strong gram-negative superbugs. They replicate and replicate and replicate until you are suddenly infected with a full host of superbugs that is really hard to cure. You see, the more we take antibiotics, the more superbugs we find. And there are some pretty interesting stats from the Longitude Prize in the UK about our misuse. 90% of general practitioners have felt pressure from patients to prescribe antibiotics. 70% of general practitioners prescribe antibiotics without knowing if they're fighting viral or bacterial infections. Remember, antibiotics only fight bacterial infections. 49% of general practitioners prescribe antibiotics without knowing if they're medically necessary, and 44% of GPs prescribe antibiotics just so a patient can leave the surgery. Now, I know what you're thinking, why should we care about stats from the UK? Well, according to data from the Ministry of Health, our antibiotic prescription rate is 70% higher here per capita than the United Kingdom. Now, this is pretty bad. So here is a solution that New Zealand should definitely look into, and it's called bacteriophage therapy. Now, what bacteriophage therapy is the utilization of something called the bacteriophage. The bacteriophage is a virus with a head in the shape of an icosahedron. It looks like something coming out of a science fiction. It's got 30 faces and 20 edges, and inside of this head is where it keeps its genetic material. That's where the magic is kept. It's attached to a long neck with little fiber legs at the bottom. The name bacteriophage derives from bacteria and phagein, the Greek to devour. You know it's good when their name is literally bacteria eater, but it keeps getting better. You see, bacteria cells are simple beings. They replicate and then divide. They replicate and then divide. What the phage does is infect its own DNA into the bacteria cell. So now the bacteria get this new DNA and they go, oh, DNA, I'm going to make some of the phage now instead. So the phage forces bacteria to create more bacteriophage microbes. And this bacteria cell swells up, it fills up with phages before it violently explodes, dying and releasing more phages to fight more bacteria cells in the infection. Now, the exciting part of this is in human health. So take someone infected with E. coli as an example. Step number 1 for treatment is the collection phase. Now this is pretty straightforward. You just need to go to a place where you'd find bacteria-infested water. This could be in a sewer, in effluent outlets, maybe even the Auckland Harbour. It's not too hard to find. You take this water, and then you apply it to E. coli in a growth medium. This is the testing phase. Now in this testing phase, you need to find out if it can kill the bacteria. So you get some E. coli from a sample. If it kills that E. coli, winner, winner, chicken dinner, the mixture is centrifuged, the phages float to the top, and then they are drawn off. Step 3 is the separation phase. This is where you separate out the phages that help kill E. coli. And now you put them in a bacteriophage cocktail that can be applied orally in pill form, and the E. coli infected victim can be saved. You see, why should New Zealand care? Well, there are some definite benefits over antibiotic usage that phage therapy has. The number one is that bacteria-specific phage therapy is better than antibiotics. You see, you probably don't know this, but most of the bacteria in you is good for you. When you take antibiotics, it kills all the bacteria it can get its hands on. Phage therapy is the heat-seeking missiles of medicine. It only kills the bad bacteria. You do not need to uphold an annoyingly consistent diet of kombucha and natural yogurts because phage therapy is so much easier to take. The second benefit of phage therapy is that it can reach places that antibiotics can't. Take jazz bassist Alfred Gertler. He broke his leg and a bacteria infection found its way into his ankle. Now, a US physician told him that there was no hope. Antibiotics could not save him, and they needed to amputate his leg. But of course, he refused, and he had to fly all the way to Tbilisi in Georgia to try phage therapy as a plan B. Now, believe it or not, but this worked. Phage therapy saved his leg and maybe even his life. And this is something that is not even legalized in the New Zealand healthcare system. Mycoplasma bovis. This is something that you've definitely seen in the news recently, and it's becoming a very large problem. See, right now we are struggling because this M. bovis is almost completely immune to most common antibiotics. We need to kill a lot of cattle infected with it because it so easily spreads and it is almost impossible to deal with. If we looked into phage therapy, we could utilize mycoplasma phages, which can target M. bovis. According to the United States Center of National Biotechnology Information, phage therapy could definitely be used as an alternative to antibiotics in the farming industry. So, where are the barriers? Where are the problems? There are definitely economic barriers to phage therapy. You see, every time you pull a bacteriophage out of the wild, it's almost pretty much a new species. This means it cannot be marketed. So, where's the problem? You see, antibiotics are so easily available because they make megabucks. Big pharmaceutical companies can churn them out and patent them, making billions and billions of dollars. You can't really patent the bacteriophage. But from a private company's standpoint, our solution to this could simply be to find ways to patent more efficient ways of collecting, testing, and treating bacteriophages. You see, some medical barriers with phage therapy is that they are very specific. You see, phage A can only ever kill bacteria A. Phage B can only ever kill bacteria B, and so on and so forth. This isn't really as much of a problem at the beginning. If bacteria A is really common in a certain area, then phage A will need to be held. You need to have a lot of stock of phage A. It makes sense, right? But if this region is hit by bacteria C out of the blue, then they will have no phage C in stock. So guess what happens now? They need to go to the collection phase. They need to get more phages. They need to test them. It's a slow process. It can take months. A big outbreak would completely squash phage therapy, but there is hope for this. You see, if we stop using antibiotics as much and we start using phage therapy for more common bacteria and easier bacteria to treat, then we can save antibiotics for big outbreaks. One of the biggest, scariest things about antibiotics right now is that if we're hit by a big outbreak of antibiotic immune strains, then we really have no backup plan. So back to the economic barriers, if we want to get into the industry, it is really hard because they have really high barriers of entry. Now, the number one barrier is that it's not legal here yet. We haven't really considered this as an option. We definitely need to legalize it. So once we've done that, we can try and get into the industry. Now, what happens now is the industry has incredibly high economies of scale. Antibiotics are very, very cheap to make, and then they are sold at a much higher price. Phages are not nearly that cheap to make. So what do? We need to find ways to get into the industry. Phages do not make much money yet, but in my opinion, our health is more important than the money we make. It means it's slower to get into, it's slower to get started, but it really is an option that we need to start considering in order to save lives. You see, with antibiotics, the incredible antibiotic industries, the pharmaceutical companies such as Pfizer and Merck, they make so much money because they can churn them out. Their antibiotic superweapons have worked wonders, but the age of the antibiotic superweapon is drawing to a close. So we need to start up a plan. Step number 1 is pretty simple. We need to legalize phage therapy in our healthcare systems. We need to go to our hospitals, we need to go to our clinics, we need to get them thinking about this kind of stuff, and we need them to research phage therapy. We need to start looking into phage therapy, we need to get it into school systems, into tertiary education systems, so that New Zealanders don't need to fly to Georgia for treatment, so they can do it here at our very shores. Step number 3 with phage therapy is we need to create big bacteriophage banks. If bacteria D comes to our shores and we are already stocked up with phage A through Z in every hospital in the country, then we will be not taken by surprise. We need to get this technology in every hospital in the country. It is a slow process, but it can be done. It's almost the DIY of antibiotics because you can do it at any rate. You can start at university with people going into these shores, going into sewers and picking them out, or you can do it at much higher levels. You see, bacteria are preparing one of their biggest counterattacks of all time. New Zealand can't afford to wait. We must be proactive. And phage therapy is the perfect place to start. Thank you.
Thanks, Germaine. Have you checked to see if there's any research on bacteriophages being done in New Zealand?
Yeah, so there is. It's very small. Our antimicrobial resistance plan does not include this yet. We haven't really looked at alternative ways to antibiotics. So,
well, research would have to be done first, presumably.
Yes, we do need to start looking into it first. It's becoming very popular overseas because of how antibiotics...
Are you saying it's not being researched in New Zealand?
No, not in scales large enough to actually start considering it.
Bacteria mutate. That's why we have broad spectrum antibiotics. How would your phage deal with that?
So, before we even knew what bacteria was, the phage has been evolving to fight bacteria. Because just like how bacteria evolves, the bacteriophage also evolves. For bacteria to become completely immune to phages would just make no sense, because 70% of life on Earth is the bacteriophage. Their whole existence is to beat antibiotics. We don't control them, but they control bacteria.
You mean to beat?
Yeah, to beat bacteria, sorry.
Right.
Sorry, yeah.
So what happens when your phage runs out of its target bacteria?
So the bacteriophage needs a host to survive, and when the target bacteria is dead, then they have no host to continue living with, so then they die as well. There is speculation, there is people saying that they might be able to extract the bacteriophage from patients that have been treated, but that it probably isn't the biggest concern.
Bacteriophage also mutate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And is that a problem? Is that part of the concern and why they're not used so much?
No, because the bacteriophage, by definition, cannot affect us. They cannot go into human cells. Bacteriophage's sole purpose is to get the bacteria cells to produce more of them. Our cells don't work that way. That's why we're completely safe from the bacteriophage. The bacteriophage evolving to hurt us is kind of like us evolving to eat concrete. It doesn't really work.
Right. Obviously, I misunderstood you. At the very top of your presentation, you said that you could die from the common cold. Mm-hmm. Why would resistance to antibiotics increase the chance of death from common cold?
So the common cold is just a common association with bacteria infections. So
common cold's a virus, right?
Oh, just bacteria infection, like the bug. Not the flu, the viral infection, the flu.
Common cold's a virus.
The common cold is like a bacteria infection.
Okay. Thank you, Germaine.
Sorry, I should have made that more clear.
All right. Cheers.